Welcome to the Hot News Channel, where we strip away the noise to analyze today's breaking stories. It is Wednesday, March 25, 2026.
And honestly, we are looking at a geopolitical landscape this morning that is, well, practically unrecognizable from what we were told to expect just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, completely. We are exactly 25 days into what the administration dubbed Operation Epic Fury.
Right.
And, when a global superpower launches a major military offensive, the public expectation, which is built by decades of media conditioning, really is one of swift binary precision.
Exactly. The narrative is always, we drop the bombs, hit the designated targets, neutralize the adversary's capabilities, and then we just declare victory.
Right. And Operation Epic Fury was totally sold to the world as this surgical contained air campaign, a quick display of overwhelming force.
But today, day 25, it's a massive paradigm shift.
It really is. It is the exact moment the official narrative has fundamentally decoupled from the mathematical and military reality on the ground.
Yeah, the divergence between what is being broadcast from those official podiums and what is actually happening has reached an absolute breaking point. We are watching two completely contradictory realities being presented to the public simultaneously. And the friction between those two realities, it is tearing the global markets apart.
Think about what you, the listener, are being told this morning. On one hand, the White House is loudly announcing these highly successful breakthrough peace talks.
Supposedly, right?
Right, supposedly. They have officially instituted a 5-day pause on striking the Iranian energy grid, citing immense diplomatic progress.
But, and here's the crazy part, at the exact same moment, the Pentagon, under the exact same administration, is actively deploying thousands of elite airborne troops to the region.
Yeah, you do not send the 82nd Airborne to a peace treaty signing.
You really don't. And we are looking at highly contested, deeply polarizing data today, So
just as a quick reminder to everyone joining us on this deep dive, we aren't here to carry water for the White House, the Pentagon, or any foreign government.
Exactly.
We are strictly synthesizing the hard data, the market anomalies, and the military logistics to figure out what is actually happening. We follow the math, not the politics.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's start with the timeline of these supposed peace negotiations, because the sequence of events over the last 72 hours is just staggering.
It's wild. So on Sunday, the administration issued a severe, maximalist 48-hour ultimatum.
Right.
The demand was absolute. Iran must reopen the Strait of Hormuz immediately, or the United States military will systematically obliterate Iran's power grids and its entire downstream energy sector.
And, that is a threat designed to totally corner the adversary. An ultimatum of that magnitude implies that target packages are already loaded into the bombers.
Oh, absolutely. The stealth fighters are on the tarmac. The aerial refueling tankers are already orbiting in their holding pattern.
Exactly. It signals that the diplomatic window has completely slammed shut.
But then suddenly, literally just before the financial markets opened on Monday morning, the president drastically changed course.
Yeah, he postponed those impending strikes by 5 days.
Right. He took to social media to claim a massive breakthrough in back-channel talks. He specifically stated he was dealing with a top person in Iran and that the dialogue was highly productive.
But when we actually look at the response from the target of that ultimatum, the official White House narrative just collapses.
Completely.
According to the analysis by Jeremy Scahill, Iran has officially, publicly, and vehemently denied that any such back-channel talks are taking place.
Wait, like a total denial?
A total denial. The Supreme Leader's office released a definitive statement demanding the complete and humiliating punishment of the aggressors. They explicitly stated that absolutely no negotiations with America have occurred at any level.
Oh.
In fact, they categorized the president's announcement of a 5-day pause as, quote, fake news intended to manipulate financial oil markets to escape the quagmire.
And the accusation of market manipulation is exactly where the hard data becomes impossible to ignore. Because, this isn't just political rhetoric. There is a literal digital paper trail.
A huge one.
According to the analysis by Katie Fang and Patrick Henningsen, predictive markets and oil futures saw massive, entirely unexplainable anomalies right around the exact moment of the president's announcement.
Yeah, to understand the gravity of this, you have to look at what happened exactly 15 minutes before the president posted about the 5-day pause.
Right.
In a single 60-second window, exactly 6,200 intermediate futures contracts traded hands.
Okay, we really need to unpack what a futures contract actually represents to grasp the scale of this trade.
Good idea.
Because when someone trades oil futures, they aren't like buying physical barrels of oil to store in a warehouse.
No, of course not.
They're buying financial contracts that dictate the price of oil at a specific date in the future. And one standard crude oil futures contract typically represents 1,000 barrels of oil.
Right.
So 6,200 contracts represents the sudden movement of 6.2 million barrels of paper oil.
And moving 6.2 million barrels in a 1-minute window is not normal market behavior. It's just not. It requires an immense amount of capital and a terrifying amount of confidence.
Yeah, right before a geopolitical announcement that would instantly crash the price of crude oil because, a war threatening the Strait of Hormuz was suddenly put on pause.
Someone or some highly coordinated group executed a trade that would yield an absolute fortune.
Exactly. They positioned themselves perfectly for a sudden drop in oil prices. And Fang pointed out that White House spokespeople have vehemently denied any insider trading. They called the allegations completely baseless.
Yes, they did.
But the sheer volume of that trade, executed exactly a quarter of an hour prior to a presidential policy shift that altered the trajectory of a major war, that stretches the limits of coincidence to the breaking point.
It does. The timing is the smoking gun of the anomaly. I mean, algorithms react to data, right? High-frequency trading bots scan news feeds, social media, economic data releases, and they execute trades in milliseconds after the information becomes public.
Keyword being after.
Exactly. But 6,200 contracts moving 15 minutes prior to the single social media post that moves the market. That requires a level of prescience that algorithms simply do not possess without a definitive advanced data feed.
Someone absolutely knew the exact timing of that announcement.
They had to. And when you look at the diplomatic personnel shifting behind the scenes, the ecosystem around these decisions gets incredibly murky.
Oh, it gets so murky. Early reports indicated that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff were originally handling these supposed back-channel talks in places like Geneva, mediated by the Omanis.
And it is worth noting the deep financial ties there. Kushner's affinity partners famously received a multi-billion-dollar investment from Saudi Arabia's public investment fund shortly after he left his official government role in the previous administration.
Which is vital context because those ties represent deeply entrenched relationships with Gulf state monarchies, whose economies are, entirely dependent on the global price of oil and the security of the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, but now, according to multiple recent reports, J.D. Vance has been touted for a new role in these ongoing negotiations.
Effectively sidelining the original duo of Kushner and Witkoff.
Exactly. So we are left with a massive analytical fork in the road here. Is this 5-day pause a genuine diplomatic off-ramp? Like a real attempt to de-escalate a war that is spiraling out of control?
Or is it a highly calculated financial maneuver designed to suppress energy prices right before the end of the financial quarter?
Which is a huge deal, because the end of the financial quarter is a ruthless metric. Every administration, regardless of political affiliation, lives and dies by economic indicators.
Right, because high oil prices lead directly to high inflation. It increases the cost of shipping, manufacturing, consumer goods, everything.
And that inflation impacts market stability and crushes voter sentiment. A sudden de-escalation announcement cools the commodities markets down immediately. It relieves the pressure at the pump.
But the speed, the precision, and the sheer financial mass of those 6,200 futures contracts strongly suggest that individuals with insider knowledge capitalized on the timing of that cooling effect.
It looks a lot less like statecraft and a lot more like an orchestrated extraction of wealth.
Okay, let me just play devil's advocate here for a second. We are in the middle of a chaotic 25-day-old war. Washington leaks like a sieve on a good day, right?
Oh, definitely.
And during a crisis, information is flying everywhere. Are we entirely sure these aren't legitimate panic trades? Could this just be institutional investors or hedge funds reacting to rumors swirling around Capitol Hill or the Pentagon, rather than, coordinated top-down insider trading?
We'll see. If it were panic trading based on rumors, you would see a gradual swell in volume over the course of hours or days as the rumors permeated the financial sector.
That makes sense.
Right. You would see volatility spreading across different asset classes. What we saw here was a concentrated, singular spike.
A massive block of 6,200 contracts dumped into the market in a 60-second window.
Yes. Followed 15 minutes later by the exact policy announcement needed to make that specific trade profitable. That is the signature of asymmetrical information. That is the signature of someone acting on a certainty, not a rumor.
Think about watching your retirement portfolio. or the price of gas at your local station, and then syncing that up with the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange and the timeline of global diplomacy.
It's unsettling.
When peace pauses align perfectly with massive futures dumps, you have to question the underlying motives of the conflict itself. And that brings us to the most glaring contradiction in the administration's current posture.
The military reality on the ground.
Exactly. The total disconnect between the rhetoric of peace and the logistics of war.
Because while the administration is posting about successful talks and trying to keep the oil markets calm, the Pentagon is executing movements that signal a massive escalation.
Right. According to the analysis by Professor Shang, the United States is actively deploying an additional 5,000 troops to the Middle East theater.
And we aren't talking about logistical support staff or, desk analysts here.
No. This deployment specifically includes 3,000 paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division and the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, the MEU, which is currently en route to the region.
Which is huge because the 82nd Airborne is the tip of the spear. They are the immediate response force for the United States military. They're designed to deploy anywhere in the world within 18 hours to secure hostile drop zones and establish a footprint for heavier follow-on forces.
Yeah, when you deploy the 82nd Airborne and a Marine Expeditionary Unit, you are not preparing for a withdrawal.
No, you are preparing for forcible entry. You are preparing for boots on the ground in a highly hostile environment.
Which completely flies in the face of the foundational claims of Operation Epic Fury. I mean, the president just requested an emergency supplemental appropriation of $200 billion from Congress to fund what is clearly shaping up to be a protracted multi-year conflict.
Well, wait, the initial strikes were supposed to be completely devastating, right?
That's what we were told. The administration claimed that Iran's Navy, their Air Force, and their advanced anti-aircraft equipment were functionally obliterated in the opening days of the campaign.
So if the enemy is truly destroyed, if their military infrastructure is just a smoking crater, why on earth does the Pentagon need 5,000 elite ground troops and $200 billion?
They need them because the air campaign failed to achieve its strategic objectives. Bombing runways and radar installations did not yield regime change, and it did not force a capitulation.
No, it didn't. And the tactical focus is now reportedly shifting, and it is shifting to one of the most dangerous geographic flashpoints on the entire planet. Kharg Island.
Yeah, we really need to unpack Kharg Island because its significance cannot be overstated here. Kharg Island is the beating heart of the Iranian economy.
It handles the vast, overwhelming majority of Iran's crude oil exports. It is essentially a giant floating oil terminal.
Right, so securing it would theoretically give the United States a physical stranglehold over Iran's primary source of revenue, while simultaneously allowing the U.S. to stabilize the global oil flow that is currently being choked off by the conflict in the Strait of Hormuz.
It is a really tempting target for military planners looking for a decisive blow, but the tactical reality of attempting to take and hold that island is terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. According to the analysis by Faris Modad and Douglas McGregor, occupying Kharg Island is an unparalleled tactical risk that borders on the suicidal.
We have to look at the geography. Kharg is situated roughly 30 kilometers off the Iranian coast. That places it well within visual and short-range strike distance of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC.
And Modad specifically highlights the threat of IRGC fiber optic FPV drones.
We hear a lot about drones, but we really need to explain why this specific technology changes the math of modern warfare.
Yeah, because traditional military defense against drones relies heavily on electronic warfare, or EW. You use massive, multi-million-dollar systems to jam the radio frequencies between the drone and the pilot, causing the drone to drop out of the sky or just lose its targeting data.
But fiber optic drones bypass that entire multi-billion-dollar defensive apparatus completely.
How so?
Well, imagine a highly maneuverable drone flying at over 100 miles an hour, carrying an armor-piercing payload. As it flies, it is literally unspooling a hair-thin, physical glass thread behind it.
Wow.
Yeah, a fiber optic cable that connects directly back to the pilot's controller on the mainland. Because the video feed and the flight commands are traveling through a physical wire rather than through the airwaves, they are completely immune to radio frequency jamming.
That is wild.
You cannot hack it, you cannot jam it. The only way to stop it is to physically shoot it out of the sky with kinetic munitions, which is incredibly difficult when you're dealing with a massive swarm of small, erratic targets.
So Kharg McGregor looks at that geographic reality. An island 30 kilometers off a hostile coast swarming with unjammable drones, and compares this specific ground operation to America's Gallipoli.
It is one of the most chilling historical comparisons a military analyst can make, honestly.
For those who might not recall the details from history class, Gallipoli was a disastrous World War I campaign masterminded by Winston Churchill.
Right.
The plan was to launch a massive amphibious assault on the Gallipoli Peninsula to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war and secure a sea route to Russia. It relied on this really arrogant assumption that naval bombardment would just easily break the defenders.
But instead, the entrenched Ottoman forces, holding the high ground, just slaughtered the attacking forces on the beaches.
The campaign resulted in hundreds of thousands of casualties and ended in a humiliating withdrawal with absolutely zero strategic gain.
So sending the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit to hold a flat, exposed island 30 kilometers off a heavily armed mountainous coast against an adversary utilizing cheap, asymmetric drone swarms, it is practically inviting a modern-day Gallipoli.
And the arrogance of the planning becomes even more apparent when you look at how the adversary is actually performing.
Oh, definitely. According to the analysis by Alexander Mercouris and Said Mohammed Marandi, the official narrative that Iran's military is depleted is just patently false.
Yeah, they have documented that Iran has successfully struck highly sensitive, heavily defended targets deep inside allied territory. They have hit the Dimona Research Center, which is the absolute core of Israel's nuclear program.
They have struck Arad, Tel Aviv, and Haifa. You do not successfully penetrate the airspace over Dimona or Tel Aviv if your military is a depleted, smoldering ruin.
Exactly. And we are seeing severe compounding consequences for United States logistics across the entire theater.
The U.S. recently had to completely evacuate the Victoria base in Baghdad, right?
Yes, which has historically been their largest and most secure installation in Iraq. They have also been forced to evacuate personnel from Al Udeid in Qatar, which is a massive logistical hub.
To make matters worse, one of the primary aircraft carriers deployed to project power for Operation Epic Fury has reportedly retreated all the way to Greece for repairs.
Wait, if they're neutralizing 94% of the incoming threats, like administration officials, specifically Pete Hegseth, have claimed on national television, why are aircraft carriers retreating to Greece?
That's the big question.
If total air dominance is established and the missile defense shields are working at a 94% success rate, sending a specialized Marine unit to secure an island shouldn't be a suicide mission.
The math changes drastically when you look at the 6% that gets through. A 94% interception rate sounds fantastic in a press briefing, right? It sounds like an overwhelming victory, but in the reality of asymmetric warfare, it is a fatal statistic.
Because of the sheer volume.
Exactly. If an adversary launches a coordinated swarm of 500 drones and ballistic missiles, and you successfully shoot down 94% of them, that means 30 advanced munitions just slipped through your multi-billion-dollar defense net.
And 30 impacts are more than enough to sink a ship, destroy a runway, or level a command center.
If you are neutralizing 94% of threats, the Dimona Research Center doesn't get hit. Tel Aviv doesn't get hit in broad daylight. You don't abandon the Victoria base.
The remaining 6%, especially when you are dealing with a nation of roughly 90 million people that has spent the last 40 years building subterranean missile factories inside the Zagros Mountains, is more than enough to turn Kharg Island into a slaughterhouse.
The Marines would be sitting ducks, relying on aerial refueling lines and naval supply chains that are being pushed further and further out of the theater by those very same strikes.
So, if the military reality on the ground is this precarious, if we are literally sending paratroopers and Marines into a kill box while our aircraft carriers fall back to the Mediterranean, you have to ask how the planners convinced themselves this was a good idea in the first place.
Why did the United States launch this campaign? What was the intelligence that justified stepping into a conflict that is now demanding $200 billion and 5,000 elite troops just to maintain a foothold?
To answer that, we have to investigate the genesis of the conflict. The original casus belli, the justification presented to the public and to the international community for going to war.
According to the analysis by Ray McGovern, we have a stunning on-the-record admission from Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
Yes, Rubio admitted that the United States preemptively attacked Iran based on the assumption that Iran would eventually retaliate against an imminent Israeli strike.
Think about the logical gymnastics of that statement. The United States did not go to war because of a direct, imminent threat to the American homeland or a sudden attack on a U.S. embassy.
No, they launched a massive military campaign because they feared what Iran might do if Israel attacked Iran first.
It is the textbook definition of a preventive war, masked as a preemptive one. And it is a staggering admission of a foreign policy driven entirely by the actions of an ally.
The United States basically allowed its military apparatus to be utilized as a vanguard for another nation's regional security objectives.
And the intelligence that paved the way for this decision is even more suspect.
Oh, it really is. Reporting indicates that David Barnea, the director of the Mossad, spent January convincing top U.S. officials that a massive, overwhelming decapitation strike would spark an immediate civilian uprising in Iran.
The pitch was that the Iranian regime was incredibly fragile, deeply unpopular, and just hollowed out from within.
Barnea sold Washington on the idea that the moment American stealth bombers shattered the IRGC's command and control infrastructure, the Iranian people would flood the streets, overthrow the Ayatollahs, and the regime would collapse like a house of cards.
We have literally heard this exact song before. It is the identical intelligence template used to justify the invasion of Iraq in 2003.
Yes, the promise that invading forces would be greeted as liberators and that a decapitation strike would result in a swift, clean regime change.
But, just like in Iraq, that uprising in Iran never materialized. Instead, the intense aerial bombardment has had the exact opposite effect. It triggered a massive rally around the flag effect.
Because when foreign bombs start destroying your national infrastructure and killing your citizens, historical and political grievances are temporarily shelved in favor of national survival.
This colossal intelligence failure was so blatant that it led directly to a high-profile resignation within the U.S. apparatus.
Right. Joe Ken, a top U.S. counterterrorism official with extensive combat experience, resigned his post.
He explicitly stated that there is absolutely no imminent threat to the United States that justified initiating this war.
He walked away from a pinnacle career position because, in his view, the intelligence was either entirely manufactured or deliberately misinterpreted to fit a predetermined policy goal.
But we have to ask, what was that predetermined policy goal? Because if the objective wasn't actually neutralizing an imminent nuclear threat...
Right. Remember, the initial narrative relied heavily on claims about Iran's nuclear breakout time. We heard Colonel Douglas McGregor cite Ted Postal's assessment, claiming that Iran allegedly possesses 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium.
Exactly, and let's quickly explain what that means. Uranium mined from the ground is mostly uranium-238, which is useless for a bomb.
Right.
To make a weapon, you have to run it through thousands of centrifuges to isolate the highly radioactive uranium-235 isotope. Civilian nuclear power requires uranium enriched to about 3% to 5%. Iran has been enriching to 60%.
And the jump from 3% to 60% requires an enormous amount of time, energy, and thousands of spinning centrifuges.
But geometrically, the jump from 60% to 90%, which is weapons grade, is incredibly short. It requires very little time. So possessing 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium means Iran is sitting right on the threshold of a nuclear breakout.
That was the initial justification sold to the public. We must strike now to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran.
But the war goals completely shifted.
What's fascinating here is that the objective morphed from securing nuclear material to sparking a civilian uprising to now seemingly supporting a massive territorial expansion by an allied nation.
According to the analysis by Faris Modad, the broader regional objective came into sharp focus on March 23rd. Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich publicly demanded that Israel permanently annex southern Lebanon all the way up to the Litani River.
This is a monumental escalation in regional ambitions. Annexation is not a temporary military occupation to clear out rocket launch sites. It is not a security buffer zone.
No, annexation means absorbing sovereign Lebanese territory into the state of Israel permanently. The Litani River has a massive geographical and resource significance. Control over the water resources of the Levant is just as critical as control over the land.
To achieve this massive territorial expansion, Israel has mobilized 400,000 soldiers. We need to really put that number into perspective. That is roughly 5% of Israel's entire population. Imagine the United States suddenly pulling 16 million working-age adults out of the economy, out of tech firms, hospitals, and supply chains, and sending them all to the front lines.
The economic strain of a mobilization that size is entirely unsustainable without massive, continuous financial and military backfilling from the United States.
And the political pressure this places on neighboring nations is shattering the region. Look at Lebanon. The Lebanese government is incredibly fragile, constantly balancing the interests of Christian, Sunni, and Shia factions.
Right, and buckling under immense diplomatic and military pressure, the Lebanese government just ordered the Iranian ambassador-designate Mohammad Reza Shibani to leave the country by March 29, 2026.
Modad warns that alienating the deeply entrenched Shia population in Lebanon, particularly Hezbollah, which operates as a state within a state, while Israel openly prepares for permanent annexation of the south, is a direct, undeniable recipe for a brutal new Lebanese civil war.
So we have a war justified by flawed intelligence regarding a civilian uprising, pivoting into a massive annexation project that threatens to tear Lebanon apart.
I have to ask, did the U.S. intelligence apparatus genuinely get fooled, or did they willingly accept flawed data to justify this massive geopolitical realignment?
That's the big question. Analysts Michael Wolff and Ray McGovern have heavily speculated on how this coalition is being maintained, and they point to extreme, unprecedented political leverage.
They reference the dark, lingering shadow of the Epstein files and the existential political survival of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Netanyahu is facing immense domestic legal peril. For a leader facing multiple corruption trials and intense domestic opposition, maintaining a state of perpetual, expanding war is often a mechanism for political survival.
Right, because war cabinets do not hold elections. Emergency powers supersede legal proceedings.
The speculation by Wolff and McGovern is that the deeply intertwined intelligence relationships between the U.S. and Israel, specifically regarding compromising materials on powerful political figures, create a dynamic where Washington is functionally unable to say no to the expansion of these war aims, regardless of the cost to American military readiness.
This brings us to a terrifying realization. The fallout from this strategic miscalculation isn't just confined to the Levant or the immediate waters of the Persian Gulf.
No, the conflict is officially spilling over, dragging the entire Middle East into the fire.
According to the analysis by Aaron Matei and Firas Modad, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are no longer just passive observers. They are actively inching toward officially joining the U.S.-Israeli war effort against Iran.
This represents the collapse of years of incredibly delicate diplomacy. For a long time, there has been a tense but functional detente between Riyadh and Tehran, a fragile peace brokered largely by Chinese diplomats who wanted stability for their energy imports.
But that entire diplomatic framework is now disintegrating. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, has reportedly called this conflict a historic opportunity to remake the region.
He views this as the ultimate chance to permanently break Iran's influence over the Middle East, and he is backing up that rhetoric with logistical support.
Saudi Arabia is now allowing American forces to use the King Fahd Air Base. This is a critical logistical lifeline because, as Modad pointed out, the U.S. has been systematically pushed out of its traditional basing options.
Right. When King Sultan Air Base was hammered and Al Udeid in Qatar was evacuated, it forced the American aerial refueling lines, the massive KC-135 tankers necessary to keep fighter jets in the air over Iran, dangerously further out from the target zones.
Giving the U.S. access to King Fahd Air Base brings those tankers back into play.
But there is a massive existential price to pay for that alignment. According to the analysis by Saeed Mohammed Marandi, the Gulf states, specifically the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, are essentially funding and enabling this war.
By providing the financial backing, the airspace, and the logistical basing for American strikes, they cross a very distinct line.
Under international definitions of armed conflict, hosting the bombers and the tankers that are striking Iranian cities makes the massive energy infrastructure of the Gulf states entirely legitimate targets for asymmetric retaliation by Iran.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We need to spend some time looking at that infrastructure because it highlights the fundamental imbalance of this conflict. Think about the metaphor of the glass infrastructure of the Gulf versus the mountainous fortress of Iran.
Let's look at Saudi Arabia's Abqaiq processing facility. Abqaiq isn't just a refinery, it is the largest crude oil stabilization plant in the world.
It processes a massive percentage of the oil pumped by Saudi Aramco before it can be exported.
And it is incredibly fragile. Abqaiq is defined by its massive spheroids and desulfurization towers. Huge, highly pressurized vessels sitting entirely exposed on the surface of the desert.
In 2019, we saw what a relatively small, unsophisticated swarm of drones could do to that facility. They hit the stabilization towers with pinpoint accuracy, temporarily knocking out over 5% of the total global daily oil supply in a matter of hours.
If Iran, fighting for its survival against an American onslaught supported by Saudi Arabia, unleashes its full arsenal of advanced fiber-optic drones and ballistic missiles against Abqaiq today, it doesn't just bump up the price of gas by a few cents.
No, if those pressurized towers and custom-built spheroids are systematically destroyed, it takes years to fabricate replacements, ship them, and rebuild the facility.
Taking Abqaiq offline for years fundamentally risks the economic survival of the Saudi state itself.
Now contrast that exposed multi-billion-dollar glass infrastructure with Iran's strategic depth. Iran is a mountainous fortress. The Zagros Mountains form a massive, natural, impenetrable wall along Iran's western border.
For decades, the IRGC has been boring deep into the granite of those mountains, building vast subterranean missile cities.
These facilities are buried hundreds of feet underground, protected by blast doors, completely immune to standard aerial bombardment, and insulated from satellite surveillance. The Gulf states live in mansions made of glass. Iran fights from a bunker buried under a mountain.
And the economic domino effect of this war doesn't stop at the borders of the Gulf monarchies. The shockwaves are devastating North Africa. Look at Egypt.
Egypt is currently being pushed to the absolute brink of systemic collapse. Modad notes that Egypt's energy import bill has tripled since Operation Epic Fury began.
But it gets worse. Because of the skyrocketing cost of natural gas, they are facing a severe cascading fertilizer crisis.
We really have to explain the connection there, because most people don't realize that energy prices dictate the global food supply. Modern agriculture relies on the Haber-Bosch process to produce ammonia for fertilizer.
That process requires immense amounts of natural gas. When natural gas prices triple, fertilizer production stops. When fertilizer production stops, crop yields plummet.
You have a nation of 120 million people in Egypt facing an imminent agricultural collapse. A populace that cannot afford bread is a populace that revolts.
The question becomes, will the Egyptian military be forced to enter the broader regional conflict simply to secure its own economic survival and force an end to the hostilities before millions starve?
And while the Gulf states posture and Egypt faces mass starvation, Iran is not negotiating from a position of weakness. They are laying out absolute, maximalist demands for a ceasefire.
They aren't asking for minor sanctions relief or temporary pauses. They are demanding total control over the Strait of Hormuz, including the sovereign right to collect maritime tolls on passing commercial ships.
They want ironclad guarantees of non-aggression, massive financial compensation for the damage caused by American and Israeli bombing, and the total unconditional evacuation of all United States military bases in the Persian Gulf.
Those aren't the negotiation points of a depleted enemy begging for a truce. Those are the demands of a victor dictating terms.
But wait, if the risks are truly that apocalyptic, if an Iranian retaliatory strike on Abqaiq could literally end the Saudi economy for a decade, why is MBS allowing the United States to launch combat operations from the King Fahd Air Base? Is the deep historical and religious hatred of the Iranian regime completely blinding the Gulf states to their own profound economic fragility?
It is a calculated, albeit incredibly dangerous, gamble by Mohammed bin Salman. He is likely operating under the assumption of the American nuclear umbrella. He may believe that if the United States military is fully committed and utilizing Saudi bases, Iran simply won't dare strike Saudi soil directly for fear of provoking a total, annihilating nuclear response from Washington.
Or alternatively, he may calculate that this is the one fleeting historical chance to permanently cripple Iran's regional hegemony, and he's willing to risk massive, short-term infrastructural damage to achieve a century of undisputed Saudi dominance.
But it's a terrifying tightrope walk. As Marendi points out, Iran's threshold for absorbing pain and economic hardship is historically much, much higher than that of the wealthy, import-dependent Gulf monarchies.
Iran's fortress strategy seems to be holding its own, much to the profound surprise of Washington and Tel Aviv. But the resilience of Iran brings us to arguably the most deafening, confusing aspect of this entire global crisis.
The silence from the rest of the world.
We have to examine the global superpowers, specifically Russia and China, because their reaction, or rather their lack of reaction, is absolutely baffling.
According to the analysis by Gilbert Doctorow, the Russian political establishment is in absolute paralyzed shock over the sheer scale and brazenness of the U.S.-Israeli attacks. Yet, despite this shock, the Kremlin remains almost entirely silent.
The silence is the most important diplomatic signal of the war.
It truly is. Remember, just recently, Iran was triumphantly inducted as a full member of BRICS, the economic bloc comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
They are also a full member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO. For years, these alliances have been heavily touted by global analysts as the ultimate counterweight to Western hegemony, a new multipolar security and economic umbrella.
Yet, despite Iran's membership in these supposedly ironclad alliances, neither Russia nor China has provided any meaningful, direct defensive support to Tehran.
They haven't intervened militarily. They haven't moved naval assets into the Gulf to deter American carriers. They haven't even attempted to establish a diplomatic no-fly zone at the UN.
Dr. Rowe essentially states that this complete lack of action renders these grand Eastern alliances functionally void in a hot war scenario. They are paper tigers when the bombs actually start falling.
It absolutely shatters the illusion of a unified multipolar security umbrella. It proves that BRICS is an economic forum, not a mutual defense pact like NATO.
But Dr. Rowe also points out a fascinating anomaly within the Eastern Bloc. While Russia and China hesitate, weighing their geopolitical exposure and issuing cautious, watered-down diplomatic statements, North Korea is the one rogue state actually stepping up to the plate.
Yes, the reporting on this is wild. Intelligence suggests North Korea is actively supplying Iran with advanced underwater drones.
We are talking about unmanned, highly sophisticated submersibles specifically designed and capable of threatening United States aircraft carriers,
which completely alters the naval dynamic in the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea. Defending against an aerial drone swarm is incredibly difficult, but anti-submarine warfare tracking an autonomous, silent, underwater drone is a nightmare.
The acoustics of the ocean, the thermoclines that hide sonar signatures, make a North Korean underwater drone carrying a heavy payload an existential threat to a multi-billion-dollar American carrier strike group.
But we have to analyze the strategic patience of the larger players in the East. Why is Vladimir Putin holding back? If Iran falls, Russia loses a major ally and a crucial node in their evasion of Western sanctions.
Dr. Rowe suggests that Putin is walking a demographic and diplomatic tightrope regarding Israel. It comes down to passports.
Oh, right.
There is a massive population of dual passport holders in Israel. Over 2 million Russian speakers currently reside there. Putin has historically tried to maintain a complex working relationship with Tel Aviv, balancing his alliance with Tehran against the immense cultural and demographic ties Russia shares with Israel.
Intervening directly to shoot down Israeli or American planes would sever that relationship instantly.
And then we have the ultimate pragmatists, China. Beijing's silence is not born of shock. It is born of profound, calculated strategy.
China is playing the long game, adhering strictly to the Sun Tzu principle of winning the war without fighting a single battle.
They are watching the United States willingly walk into a geopolitical meat grinder. China is waiting to capitalize on a ruined global economy.
If the United States exhausts its military resources, depletes its strategic financial reserves, burns through hundreds of billions of dollars in supplemental funding, and completely alienates the entire global South by backing a devastating regional war, China emerges as the ultimate undisputed victor.
They let the United States destroy its own hegemony, and then Beijing steps in to rebuild the ashes with the Belt and Road Initiative.
This raises an important question. If Iran actually survives this onslaught entirely alone, if they fight off the combined weight of the United States and Israel using their mountainous geography, their fiber optic drones, and their proxy networks without any direct Russian or Chinese military intervention, doesn't that prove they never needed the BRICS security umbrella in the first place?
It completely rewrites the hierarchy of the multipolar world order. Iran wouldn't just be a regional player. They would emerge as an undisputed independent superpower in the Middle East, owing nothing to Moscow or Beijing.
That is a highly compelling point.
If Iran withstands the full might of Operation Epic Fury and forces the U.S. to withdraw or negotiate on Iranian terms, their leverage in future negotiations within BRICS, the ESCO, and the global energy markets goes through the roof. They become the nation that broke the American military machine.
I have to counter that, though. Is Iran actually surviving, or are they just taking a level of unsustainable punishment that will inevitably lead to a societal collapse?
That's a fair question.
Yes, they are fighting an asymmetric war brilliantly, sinking ships, hitting Dimona, forcing base evacuations. Tactically, they are defying all Pentagon projections. But their civilian infrastructure is being systematically decimated.
Power grids are offline. Hospitals are running on generators. Customs offices and border checkpoints are being wiped out.
At a certain point, A nation's ability to functionally govern and provide for its citizens collapses, regardless of how many fiber optic drones they have left in the Zagros Mountains.
That is the tragic, unforgiving reality of a war of attrition. Iran's grand strategy is based on outlasting the political will of the West, but the cost being paid in human lives and civilian infrastructure is absolutely horrific.
However, as Professor Morandi emphasized in his analysis, the ideological resilience of the Iranian population is fundamentally different from the political calculations of the West.
The Iranian populace, despite internal political divisions, largely views this conflict as an existential fight for survival against a foreign aggressor attempting to erase their sovereignty. Their threshold for capitulation is incredibly high.
The United States and Israel are betting they can bomb Iran into submission. Iran is betting they can bleed the global economy, choke the Strait of Hormuz, and cause enough financial pain that the American electorate forces Washington to withdraw.
We have covered a staggering amount of ground, data, and geopolitical theory today, from the trading floors of Wall Street to the subterranean missile silos of the Zagros Mountains.
The one crucial takeaway from this deep dive, the singular point you, the listener, need to remember as you watch the news for the rest of the week, is this. The official narrative of impending peace and highly successful negotiations is a deliberate, mathematically disprovable smokescreen.
It is a facade, meticulously designed to manage market panic and suppress inflation while the military moves its chess pieces.
The hard data does not lie. From the 6,200 futures contracts executed perfectly 15 minutes before a presidential post, to the 5,000 elite paratroopers and Marines deploying to the theater right now, every single metric signals that the United States is committing to a protracted, devastating ground conflict.
Operation Epic Fury is not ending in 5 days. This is going to fundamentally reshape the global economy and completely redraw the map of the Middle East.
You're operating in the incredibly muddy waters of a global crisis, and the traditional instruments of diplomacy have entirely broken down.
Which leaves us with a final massive question for you to mull over as you watch the markets open tomorrow.
If Iran successfully enforces a physical toll on the Strait of Hormuz, effectively controlling the flow of the world's energy through unjammable asymmetric warfare, does the U.S. dollar survive as the global reserve currency? Or are we currently watching the violent, fiery birth of a completely new financial era?
A question that will undoubtedly define the economic reality of the next decade.
If you found this analysis valuable, hit the plus or follow button on your podcast app and give us a like. Subscribe to the Hot News channel for more deep dives. Until we meet again, goodbye.